Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, Homeward Bound. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We are going to wrap that sale up by the end of the month, so make sure you check it out. You can lock in the lower rate as long as you do not cancel. You will get access to a lot of different crypto charts, but also we have equities and macro charts and real estate charts as well. So make sure you check that out. Link is in the description below, and we'll run it for about one more week. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, I've had this sort of thesis out for a while that before the next sustained bull run can begin, Ethereum should eventually return home. If you're unfamiliar what home is, it's essentially the equivalent of the fair value regression, logarithmic regression trend line, again, fit to quote unquote non-bubble data. Now, non-bubble data is essentially somewhat ambiguously defined in these non-bubble phases. So you essentially just fit the regression bands to data that's not part of what you would consider to be a bubble, okay? And by doing so, you sort of extract where the deep value zones are for long-term investors, right? That's the general idea. We talked about it for Bitcoin. We talked about it for Ethereum. Now, so far, the fair value logarithmic regression line for Ethereum has eluded ETH USD so far. When we first started talking about this a long time ago, if you followed this channel back in 2019, you probably remember the accumulation phase of a lifetime video right here. And we were talking about Ethereum over here at $100 and talking about how great of a deal it was. And then we put out a video right here called Ethereum, the reaccumulation phase of a lifetime, because we sort of saw this bull market coming. And what's interesting is, this was essentially a 50x move. And ever since then, Ethereum has been, ever since this bear market started, right? After this drop here, Ethereum has basically just been stuck in a range, right? Stuck in a range. But it hasn't stopped people from sort of prematurely declaring victory over the idea that it won't go home, right? I see that happen a lot as people say, well, Ethereum's back up to $2,000. And therefore it's not going to go back to those lower levels, right? I would say that people are likely celebrating prematurely, and there still is a very high risk that Ethereum could in fact return home. We talked about this quite frequently back in Q1 of 2022. We saw the rejection off the 200-day SMA, especially for Bitcoin. We called for lower lows. We got them. And we almost made it to the lower regression trend line, but we did not quite make it there. And so to me, I would still suggest there's a good chance, a very high chance in my mind, that Ethereum will go back down to the fair value regression trend line, fit to quote unquote non-bubble data, or home if you prefer, before this is all said and done. Now, I will say, hopefully it goes home soon because I am running out of movie titles to sort of name these videos. But one thing to consider, there's an actual interesting comparison here. If you look back at sort of this move over here, what you'll notice is that ETH USD sort of fell into this range, right? And this range was essentially from around 2,100 up to around 3,600. And what you'll notice is that if we call sort of entering into this range as, let's say, 1, and then going to the bottom and forming this low as 2, coming back up is 3. Let me actually fix this to the actual range here. So this is where we first came into the range. So coming back up to the top part of the range is 3. Putting in a slightly higher low is 4. And then breaking out beyond the range, sort of a false breakout, is 5. Everyone always likes how I draw the 5s, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've actually done something very similar this time around. You can see us sort of falling into the range, right? This range, and then by the way, this range has so far been from $875 all the way up to around $2,000. So we first came all the way down, right? So we'll call that 1 here. Back up to the top is 1 is right here. Then 2 is the bottom of the range, right? And then back up to the top is 3. A slightly higher low is 4, and then sort of this false breakout right here is 5. And so the argument is, well, are we repeating the same thing that happened over here? And if so, does that mean we're in for a pretty brutal 3 months to come? Note that this move here started in April, right? The false breakout, or the breakdown from the false breakout started the week of April 4th. This breakdown from this potential false breakout, we can't fully know yet, started the week of April 17th. So there are certainly some similarities, I think, to compare to here with ETH USD. Now, again, when we talk about crypto, one thing that I think people need to be constantly reminded of is that 100% moves are completely normal, and even in bear market years and in recovery years, they're still really, really normal. And in 2018, we saw 100% rallies, right? I mean, and it doesn't necessarily mean that Ethereum can't fall back down, right? I mean, this was a 350% rally, and we still eventually more or less revisited the lows. So there are, I think, a lot of people prematurely declare victory, right? And enjoy dunking on me for calling, for saying that I think Ethereum is coming home just because it's been sort of in this range for the last year or so, right? But to me, there's a big difference between, calling an accumulation phase of a lifetime over here, and even saying that even at $100, right, it was an incredible opportunity, and seeing a 50x rally. And now you have the bulls and the bears sort of squabbling over whether we're at the top of the range or the bottom part of the range, right? These 50% moves, 100% moves in either direction, to the upside, 50% moves to the downside. And as a long-term investor, yes, 50% moves are nice, 100% moves to the upside are nice, but it's not really that dissimilar from things that we've already seen. And so I think you can make the case that there still is a risk here of ETH returning home. Now, where is home? If you look back to where home was back in 2022 and in sort of the summer of 2022, it was around $600. Now it's around $800. Okay, but also do note that when we were over here, we actually went below sort of that fair value, which is that middle line, and the lower bound on the lower regression trend line is now at 574. I've said many times, I think the deep value zone on Ethereum, if we can get it, is somewhere between 400 to 600. There's, of course, no guarantee we go to those levels. If we go back to 700 or 800, we'll already be back home. But it is something that you should, I think about, is that this could be an eventual outcome to at least consider. Now, you might say, well, what if, is there a reason to hedge? I've always said there's a reason to hedge. But for me personally, the thing that I'd have a hard time with Ethereum right now is that not only do I think that it needs to return home before we can really get into a sustained bull market, but I also think that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is just simply in a downtrend. And I put out an entire video on this yesterday, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it today. But just to give you a general idea, we just keep putting in one lower high after another. And every single lower high, you see people sort of celebrating and calling for the flippening again, only for it to just be another lower high. And the last two times, at least, a potential just rejection off the bull market support band or bear market resistance band, if you will. So to me, it's really hard to get on board the Ethereum train at this point, because I see it bleeding back down against the US dollar. I see it bleeding back down against Bitcoin, and rallies back up to sort of the top part of the range don't negate that. In fact, if you were to think cyclically, this is around the same time that you would expect Ethereum to roll back over. You might say, well, what are you talking about? Well, look what happened over here. Ethereum rallied up, but then it actually just came right back down. When did it start its move back to the downside? In June of 2019. Now you might say, well, June, that means we have 2 more months. Well, we could, although there's another case to be made that the halving for Bitcoin is going to come sooner this time. So perhaps we've already reached this point, right? Perhaps this point has already been achieved, and perhaps this is the rollover to the downside. We already know that Ethereum seasonality isn't really that great going into the summer. We saw that last time. We saw that in April of 2022. We saw that in May of 2021, right? So it's not really that dissimilar from what we saw the last 2 years. Another thing I think we should consider is if you measure it from the peak, look at this. This is Ethereum measured from the peak. The blue line is sort of the last peak at 1,400, all the way down to around $100, maybe a little less than 100, and then all the way up to 4,800. Look at this one, right? From 4,800 down to where we've currently gone. You can see that last cycle, this Ethereum rolled over at day 529 from the peak. We're currently at day 533. So we're past that point. So the argument here is, what if we're entering into sort of this phase where we just get into this secondary bear phase where we just spend, like 6 to 9 months going down off and on until the real bull market begins, closer to the next Bitcoin halving, closer to the next period of money printing, quantitative easing, and all that good stuff. I think there's a case to be made for that. And you might say, well, what's the narrative to pull us back down? I think you could say regulation risk, although that one's probably a bit overblown. I think regulation risk is still there. I think the more so case to be made is the recession risk, right? And I've said that many times. The recession risk, where are you going to hide? Is crypto really the place to hide in a recession? I don't know. I mean, I struggle to see how, especially the altcoin market is going to hold up well during a potential recession. You might say, well, what if the recession doesn't occur? That's a possibility, but even in cases where it doesn't occur, history shows us that stocks can still go down, even if there's a scare of a recession, right? All the layoffs that you're seeing are leading to initial claims going up, continued claims going up. Those are normally leading indicators for the unemployment rate to go up, and the unemployment rate, when it starts to go up, that's where risk assets tend to go down. I don't really think Ethereum is going to act any differently than a lot of the risk assets that have historically gone down once the unemployment rate starts to go up. So you could argue that if we are starting to enter this phase here, then could that bring us back home? Now, last time that move to the downside was a 75, 76% move to the downside. Now, a 75, 76% move, I mean, that gets you down to $500. Does Ethereum have to go to 500? I'm not saying it has to go that low, but there's a risk of it occurring. I mean, even if it were to only go down, say, 65%, that would get you to 800, right? Which would get you to the sort of it would get you back home, right, to the fair value logarithmic regression trend line. So I think that's something that you have to consider is this sort of that move? And one argument to be made is that perhaps we did not go down lower over here because of all the ETH that was locked up. However, now if we have to face a recession risk with all this Ether becoming unlocked, then that's an issue, right? Like that becomes an issue, and it could lead you back down to those lows or potentially a lower low, right? There is a risk of a lower low here. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that. And hey, listen, they could be right? They could be right. I would say let's reassess, as we in maybe 3 to 6 months. But I'm still of the opinion that we will eventually go home, and a move back up to the top of the range for me does not change that. I also think the dominance of Bitcoin is heading higher. I think Ethereum's Bitcoin valuation is heading lower. And I think Ethereum USD is likely going to head lower as we get into this sort of cyclical time where you really start to see it roll back to the downside before you gear up for the true bull market. And then, guys, this happens like every single halving year, right? Like even in 2015, we sort of had two false breaks to the upside with Bitcoin that both got faded and came back down. And in 2019, Bitcoin rallied up to 14K and it faded and came back down. And every single time, people start calling for new highs and crazy price predictions start pouring in from everywhere, and then it just gets faded, and then we come back down, and then the real bull market begins in the halving year for Bitcoin, and it drags everything else up with it. So, look, I know there's a lot of Ether bulls out there that call for the flippening and whatnot, but again, right, it's just a series of lower highs. That's all it is. Try not to just get sucked in because I mean, this is what it does, right? It just sucks people in, and it gets you to think that it's going to go flip Bitcoin, and then it just comes back down, and then it just puts in another lower high, one after another. Ethereum USD has been a little bit more resilient than Ether Bitcoin, but you still run the risk of it just being a potential false breakout here again, followed by a slow bleed back down. So these are I think important considerations for us to think about as we continue to push forward into this year. So this is my general assessment. I am still of the opinion that Ethereum will go home. I think it will occur this year. I think that the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation is just continue to put in lower highs. And by the way, I mean, it was only a week ago where everyone was calling for alt season. And I came out with a video and said, like, I mean, we've talked about the altcoin reckoning. We've talked about how alts are bleeding against Bitcoin, although most people don't want to admit it. Many of them are bleeding on their USD pairs as well, and even putting in new lows, or they're really close to the lows. And I said before, right, the social risk, I'm watching people literally leave crypto, right? You might say, well, is that normal? Yeah, it happens. It happens every pre-halving year, right? Like every pre-halving year, everyone gets bored. The altcoin market bleeds, and a lot of alts put in new lows. And no one wants to believe it, but I'm looking at the social statistics on not only my channel, because you might say, well, Ben, you're not a good example, right? You're boring. Maybe people just don't want to listen to you. But I can look at all these other channels as well. And even the people that are putting out the most bullish predictions, a lot of them are still losing subscribers. They're still seeing a deterioration of the views that they're getting. So, which is completely different than what we saw back in 2021 when these things were in an uptrend and supported alt season and supported the dominance going lower. Now, these people are leaving crypto, which again I think removes liquidity mainly from the altcoin market, and will lead to the dominance of Bitcoin going higher and alt USD pairs going lower and alt Bitcoin pairs going lower. And then maybe by the third or fourth quarter of this year, we'll finally start to sort of come out from sort of this mess that we're in. And with Ethereum, whether it's a double bottom or a lower low, I think it's somewhat irrelevant at this point. But I do think it will fade back in here. Whether it starts now or whether it starts in a month or two, I think is irrelevant. I think that there's, for me anyways, there's still pretty compelling evidence to think that Ethereum will come back home eventually. I think it'll be worth the wait. I am growing old waiting for it, of course. And then from there, we can begin talking about, a new bull market, right? So maybe something like if we were to draw a path out, like something like this, right? Where it sort of falls back in. And then from here, we build out a base and try to ultimately, trend higher. That's the dream, right? That's the dream. At least for me. At least for me anyways. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Links in the description below. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.